Hello and welcome to the Symposium. My name's Carl, and today I'd like to talk about the dog-headed men of India, which is something that apparently has a long history, going right the way back to the 5th century BC in Greece. Now, I'm not talking about the phenomenon of religious deities having dogs' heads and therians, which has a horrible modern connotation now, but in ancient lore was the term used for half-man, half-animal hybrids, I suppose. The sort of Anubis or St. Christopher was often depicted having a dog's head in Eastern Orthodox icons. No, I'm talking about claims from historians, explorers, diplomats, and philosophers, and anyone who has recorded something from history, any kind of ethnographer who claims that there are such a thing. And Cestius in the 5th century BC in Greece was a Greek who was a physician to Artaxerxes, the emperor of Persia. And while in his time there, he claims to have, he wrote a volume of stories called Indica, stories that he got from essentially the Silk Road, from various travelers who would tell him about various places in India. And this is what he says about the dog-headed men there. On these, the Indian mountains, where live men with the head of a dog, whose clothing is the skin of wild beasts. They speak no language but bark like dogs, and in this manner make themselves understood by each other. Their teeth are larger than those of dogs, their nails like those of animals, but longer and rounder. They inhabit the mountains as far as the river Indus. Their complexion is swarthy, they are extremely just. Like the rest of the Indians with whom they associate, they understand the Indian language but are unable to converse, only barking or making signs with their hands and fingers by way of reply, like the deaf and dumb. They are called the Indian Calistriae, in Greek cynocephaly, the dog-headed, and they live on raw meat, number about 120,000, and they lived in caves in the mountains. Isn't that interesting? He can tie them to a location, tell us how many there are, roughly, and tell us about their manners and customs. And this is something, this is the first sort of solid account we get of the Indian dog-headed men. Herodotus mentions them, saying just vaguely that dog-headed men live in the lands east of Libya, which, Libya is about roughly where Italy is. So there's a lot of land east of Libya. Megasthenes is another one in the 4th century BC. He is a Diadochi diplomat, a diplomat of the successor states, the Seleucid Empire, and it was Seleucus II, I think it was, possibly the first. I assume it was the first. The successor emperor over Asia, basically. He also wrote a book called Indica, but he did it after actually visiting India. And he claimed that the dog-headed men lived in the mountains of India and they wore animal hides and barked to communicate. However, it's entirely possible this is just a lift-off of the previous account by Cestius. Ctesias? I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. Pliny the Elder mentions that he cites Megasthenes and claims that dog-headed men lived in Ethiopia as well. And forwarding ourselves about 500 years, St. Augustine of Hippo in the 5th century AD, in the City of God, he speculates about the origins and plausibility of the existence of dog-headed men, and assuming they exist, whether they would be human or not. And this is something that's carried on by Rat Ramnus, who's a Frankish theologian, who fretted about whether they should convert the dog-headed men to Christianity. And this philosophical debate carried on until the 13th century. There was a genuine belief in medieval Catholic thought that out in India somewhere there was a race of dog-headed men, and we weren't sure if they were human or not. And there are various ethnographies of men and beasts, and then bestiaries. And the dog-headed men would be featured in both because people weren't sure. Are they men or are they beasts? I think in the end, the consensus actually came down to them being human. So you may as well proselytize Christianity to them. And it was all about whether they should be converted to Christianity because, of course, if they're just animals, why would you bother? But obviously they're not. And this carried on, and in the 13th century, Marco Polo, the famous Venetian explorer who travelled to China and became a diplomat for Kublai Khan, claimed that he had been told about the dog-headed men when out there. Angermanian, or however it's Angermanian, I can't pronounce these words, is a very large island. The people there are without a king and are idolaters, and no better than wild beasts. And I assure you that all of the men of this island have heads like dogs and teeth and eyes likewise. In fact, in the face they are all just like big mastiff dogs. They have a quantity of spices, but they are a most cruel generation, and eat everyone that they can catch, if not of their own race. They live on flesh and rice and milk, and have fruits of any different from any of ours. So he claims that he has been told about this. But the thing is, all of these are second-hand accounts, third-hand accounts. They're tales of a tale of a tale that have been told to the person we get to. But we do actually have first-hand accounts of people who claim to have met dog-headed men. The earliest one is Odoric of Pordone, who's a 14th century AD Franciscan friar from North Italy, who in the late 13th century and early 14th century visited China on a diplomatic mission after the Mongol invasions of Europe, so presumably sent by the Pope. In his work Itinerarium, he reports firsthand the experience of meeting dog-headed men. He says, "Moreover, I travelled further on the ocean sea towards the south, and passed many countries and islands, whereof one is called Mumaron. It containeth in compass 2,000 miles, wherein men and women have dog faces, and worship an ox for their god, and therefore every one of them carry the image of an ox of gold or silver upon their foreheads. The men and the women of this country all go naked, save that they hang a linen cloth before their privates. Men of the said country are very tall and mighty, and by reason that they go naked, when they are to them make battle, they carry iron or steel targets before them, which they do cover and defend their bodies from top to toe. And whoever of their foes they take in battle, not being able to ransom himself for money, they presently devour him. But if he is able to redeem himself for money, they let him go free. Their king weareth about his neck 300 great and most beautiful pearls, and saith every day 300 prayers unto his God. He weareth upon his finger also a stone of a span long, which seemeth to be a flame of fire, and therefore when he wear it, no man dare approach unto him. And they say that there is not any stone in the whole world of more value than it." Isn't that an interesting account? He claims to have seen them with his own eyes. He went to the country personally. Now, I don't really know what to say about this. This is obviously nonsense, right? This obviously has to be nonsense. I don't believe in dog-headed men because it doesn't appear to be any evidence at all of dog-headed men. But again, in the 14th century, another traveller and scholar, an explorer, this time from Morocco, called Ibn Battuta, went to India and claims to have met personally men with heads or faces shaped like dogs. He says, 15 days after leaving Sundaridwan, we reached the country of the Baranaka, whose mouths are like those of dogs. This tribe is a rabble, professing neither the religion of the Hindus nor any other. They live in reed huts roofed with grasses on the seashore, and have abundant banana, areca, and betel trees. Their men are shaped like ourselves, except their mouths are shaped like those of dogs. This is not the case with their womenfolk, however, who are endowed with surpassing beauty. Their men, too, go unclothed, not even hiding their nakedness, except occasionally for an ornamental pouch of reeds suspended from their waist. The women wear aprons of leaves from trees. With them reside a number of Muslims from Bengal and Sumatra, who occupy a separate quarter. The natives do all their trafficking with the merchants on the shore and bring them water on elephants, because the water is at some distance from the coast, and they will not let the merchants go to draw it for themselves, fearing for their women because they make advances to well-formed men. Elephants are numerous in their lands, but no one may dispose of them except the Sultan, from whom they are bought in exchange for woven stuffs. Now, it really sounds like everyone in the past might have actually been racist. I mean, I think that what they are describing as dog-headed or dog-faced men of India or somewhere in Southeast Asia is probably just a type of human that looks odd. I mean, I don't know whether it's like Indian mystics with funny shaped beards or something that they're talking about. Because what's interesting is that Ibn Battuta actually distinguishes them between the Hindus and these dog-faced men. So these are not the same people. They look different. But it does seem that maybe to the people who had recently arrived, that some of the native tribes, I mean, that we've got such a good description of these, that they must have seen something that they were interpreting, and maybe uncharitably calling dog-faced. But it seems like some of, at least some of the tribes there, to more sort of Western eyes, and I don't mean Western ideologically, I mean just geographically, people from North Africa and Europe. I guess to the travellers of the 14th century, maybe these people did look something like dogs, something like mastiffs. I don't know. I mean, I really have no idea. But that's the best explanation I have, and I can think of, that they're just really mean about the people's appearance. Because I obviously don't believe that there were people with actual dog heads, But I do think that these people were talking about something. I don't think they were just talking about nothing. They claim to have seen something, and generally these accounts are fairly reliable in all other things. So I do wonder. I am forced to conclude that they just had a really uncharitable interpretation of a people in the Far East that they found, I don't know, I guess particularly ugly. Apart from Ibn Battuta, who found the women okay.